Members Campbell?
Yes.
Augustana?
Here.
Strawbridge? Young? And Mayor Patterson?
Here. Good evening, everyone. Marilyn Bardet. I attended the Contra Costa County Board of Soups meeting this morning, where the large focus and the people, so CAL FIRE and the regional fire departments were complimented and, of course, appreciated for all that they did to do the best that they could under the circumstances to get that fire out. And thank God we didn't have a lot of wind. In fact, it was a very calm day. But all of us saw the cloud that went over both Benicia and Valero. I couldn't tell you how wide that cloud was, but I shot images of it myself. And the thing that concerned me, and I'd written about already, and maybe some of you had written or read what I had to say, but I said it at this meeting this morning. But for some of you, maybe you don't know what I had said, so I'm going to repeat a little bit of it. The explosion that decimated and caused the Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery to be shut down, and they went into bankruptcy afterwards because it was a fireball, basically, destroyed the refinery. And in 3 months' time, that explosion happened in June, and by this last month, very recently, the root cause analysis was announced, a preliminary determination that it was an elbow joint in a pipe, and the thickness of the pipe was about that of a credit card. And so you see that a whole refinery can be vulnerable to a leak in a pipe, and it can cause the destruction of the whole refinery. So how do you think the people in Rodeo especially felt when P66 expansion plans to put, and that's Phillips 66 refinery, plans to put 6 butane and propane spheres, brand new, in a liquefaction zone right on the shoreline, 2,300 feet from the nearest residences. Those people, when the New Star explosion occurred, had only one route. If there had been called for an evacuation, and it was questioned whether an evacuation would be called for Rodeans, depending on the wind and how they got that grass fire out, they would have had only San Pablo Dam Road to get out of town on. And you can imagine that if there were a greater explosion and more than 2 tanks exploded, those people might be trapped in place without any route out of town. So no evacuation route that would be possible, since we know that I-80 was closed for 5 hours, 6 hours, with rush hour, etc., and they couldn't have accessed that road. So, and they also said, one person said that Valero would have been hugely impacted if more than 2 of those tanks had exploded. And if there was a major thing during an earthquake where the refinery was at P66 seriously harmed, you could have a real tragedy in Vallejo, let alone how we would be downwind of such a circumstance. And now we can't talk about these things as, oh, it's not going to happen. The safety record, the OSHA record, everything is so great at these refineries. Guess what? If the maintenance isn't done in a way that makes the regulations give us that sense of safety, forget it. Because New Star, what we learned today, besides New Star and the complications of why that like the contractor on the site there was no way to get the emergency foam and everything activated right then and there. Turns out that 15 other tank farms in Contra Costa County alone are unregulated. I mean, they have, in other words, there's a patchwork regulatory environment, and this is not going to I haven't seen you in a long while. A patchwork set of relations that governs 15 tank farms that are not under the ISO of Contra Costa County. Randy Sawyer said that. That's really important to know. Because when we talk about protections, and the ISO is very good, we want that sort of protection here. I don't know what protects us with our tank farms here. I don't know. They talked about everything today. The foam, the gallons and gallons of foam that was used, the conditions around. It turns out that New Star facility is at the bottom of a drainage for an old river or or creek that runs right under the facility. So
I regret to tell you,
yeah,
you are out of time.
I'm out of time. I have other.
Thank you for bringing the
Yeah.
information, and we'll look forward to further reports.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, why don't you join me in thanking our staff? And so, welcome everybody for coming to the workshop tonight. It's been a long journey for many of us seeking air monitors and real-time data for the community and ambient air quality, meaning our quality of air here and the sources of air pollution. And a long journey for air monitoring to determine to what extent the community is affected by Valero. For many in this room, it has been at least a 20-year journey. This workshop is the result of recently adopted Benicia Valero Cooperation Agreement adopted by the Council this June to improve communication and cooperation between Valero and the city, enhance emergency preparedness, and increase the efficacy of the city's response to accidental releases of hazardous substances. This is our seat at the table. The objective of tonight is to provide a comprehensive overview of air monitoring activities and programs in the community of Benicia, to answer your questions related to this and to be informed how to improve our ombudsman communication, access to documents, and future answers to questions that may not be able to be answered tonight. To do that, we've invited speakers from several organizations who contribute to Benicia's air monitoring efforts. The Bay Area Quality Management District, which henceforth I will, as I have all done for the last 40 years, refer to as the Air District. Valero Benicia Refinery, which I'll refer to as Valero. The new 501c3 organization called Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program, which I will refer to as BCAM. And our Benicia Fire Department, Fire. We are grateful that they are here so we can hear directly from them about their role in monitoring Benicia's air quality. We will not solve or address air pollution tonight. We will focus on air monitoring only. I have always been proud of our community and its civility. I am counting on you to adhere to our code of conduct, and here are a few guidelines. Respect others who may have a different view of things and avoid editorializing what someone else has said. Avoid humor at someone else's expense. Avoid speeches so that others have time to ask questions and follow up if necessary. And respect the chair. In short, we are setting the tone for our seat at the table with community partners, and I encourage you to join me in showing our appreciation for their attendance through our courteous attention to their presentations and by staying focused on the topic at hand, air monitoring. The Council's role tonight is to listen to the information provided, ask questions, and provide any appropriate direction. Before I turn the meeting over to Fire Chief Josh Chadwick, who will facilitate tonight's presentations, let me state that based on what I heard from the Council and the public, my outcomes for tonight are to learn, 1, what is the date certain for the Air District Community Monitoring Station prescribed by EPA? 2, what is the nature of and how will there be an independent assessment of the accuracy of Valero fence line monitors? 3, to what extent will there be accessible archival data from the Valero monitors? 4, to what extent will there be publicly accessible real-time or near real-time reporting from the Air District of monitoring data from all monitoring stations? And then 5 is affirm routine community workshops in the initial setup of the cooperation agreement, and perhaps at least in the next 6 months. Chief Chadwick will facilitate the panel, take questions from the Council and public, and the Council may give direction to staff.
My name is Josh Chadwick. I'm the Fire Chief here in the City of Benicia. And as the Mayor discussed, the purpose of this is to discuss air monitoring. I honestly feel like we, through good collaboration between the City Council, City staff, community organizations, and Valero, I think we're in a better spot than we were even 12 months ago. And I think that right off the bat is important to recognize. Does that mean we're done? Absolutely not. We have work to do, and in my mind, I would like to see Benicia be the model community for air monitoring, and I think we could get there. We've already got good relationships established. And if we continue working with those good relationships, I think we could become the model district, not even just in the Bay Area, but really in the state or even the nation. So that's kind of our overarching goal, and we're not going to get there overnight, but we can work towards it. So air monitoring, the mayor touched on it briefly, but we're not going to solve air pollution. That's not really what it's about right now. It's about knowing what's in our air. It's crucially important for the fire department. From my standpoint, I want to know what's in the air because it's going to make it's going to be decision points and triggers for what actions we take. If we send out an advisory, if we do a shelter in place, if we issue an evacuation order, those are decisions that are going to be partially based on good quality data. Important to have that good quality data to make those decisions. So from an emergency response standpoint, critically important. From a community standpoint, it's also critically important. There are community members that may want to go above and beyond what the health department and what the fire department recommends. We may issue an advisory, and you may choose to want to shelter in place anyways, on your own. Even if you're, we may say for elderly children or respiratory compromised, and maybe you make the decision that you want to do it on your own. And part of that decision is going to be based on air monitoring. And again, good, accurate data. So that just I just want to set the tone of really the purpose and where we're at with that. We really kind of already talked about the objectives. I want to reiterate my thanks to everybody who we've invited. I invited Doug, and he didn't have a chance. He had to come from the fire department. Valero, we invited them to come be part of this, and they, graciously accepted. Their air quality accepted, and B-Camp accepted. So we're off to a good start with this. So I'm really happy about that. Real quick, I'm going to go into some introductions, a little bit deeper introductions, talk about what you're going to hear, and then we'll get started. So right off the bat, Doug Seguliev, he's one of the firefighter engineers in the Benicia Fire Department. He's also one of our hazardous materials technicians, and he's also our air monitoring guru. He won't like that I said that, but it's true. He's our go-to guy when it comes to air monitoring. So I asked him to come here tonight and give us a bit of a presentation on our portable air monitoring capabilities, procedures, and how we use the equipment. Beyond that, we've got Paul Adler from Valero. He is the Director of Community Relations and Government Affairs, and he's going to provide a little bit of an update on Valero's progress towards increased air monitoring, some information on what was already established and what's been done recently with some of the new regulations, including the fence line air monitoring. We have Jerry Bovey from Bay Area Air Quality Management District, or BACMed. Jerry is Air Quality Engineer Manager, is that right?
Yes.
All right. And we also have Eric Stevenson from BACMed, and he is the Director of Meteorology and Measurement. Right?
No, I'm now the Air Monitoring Officer.
Air Monitoring Officer. Is that a promotion or a demotion? All right, so they're going to be here to present the efforts to improve air monitoring in our area. They're going to talk about new regulations, how these regulations affect Bay Area communities, and specifically Bay Area refinery communities, and some of the challenges that they've had with implementing these regulations. Then going down the road, I've got David Lindsay. He's the board chair for B-Camp, correct? Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program. And as the mayor mentioned, this is a new nonprofit organization that is going to be hopefully helping us improve air monitoring in Benicia. And finally, we have Kathy Carriage, who is a board member of B-Camp as well. And they're going to talk about how their organization was established, the current status of B-Camp, the short range and long range goals or plans to improve air monitoring in our community. As it was mentioned, there's going to be time for public comment and questions. I'm sort of struggling with the format. I think it would probably be best if the presenters did their presentations and we held the questions and kind of got through that at this point. I think it would just be it'd be smoother. So let's go with that plan for now. Everybody will give their presentations. Hopefully you can take some notes if you have some questions specific on each presentation, and then at the end we'll open it up for discussion and questions. Does that sound all right?
That sounds good. Are there any questions from the council?
That works.
Okay, you got a okay on that?
Okay, so then our first presenter is going to be Doug Scully talking about portable air monitors. And just for the presenters, I know this has been stuck on the Bay Area slide, but you're going to have to come up here and start each one separately. I apologize. This is just a static slide, so I might do that.
More of a hands-on
Useful or not, there we go.
thing. So,
Doug.
all right, thank you. Good evening. I'm Doug Siglia. I'm an engineer with Benicia Fire Department and a senior member of the Solano County Interagency Hazmat Team. It's good to be here. I'm excited to be here. Air monitoring is something that I really do enjoy and talking about. A couple things. One, public speaking has never been my strength. I wish I had Chief Chadwick's public speaking skills, so please bear with me as I proceed through this. A little about me. I'm not a scientist. Back in college, I was a science major, and I do have degrees in science, but really where I'm at is I'm a hazmat specialist. That's really the focus of my training. We do a lot of hazmat related responses in the county. Also a hazmat trainer for the California State Training Institute. That's kind of my focus. But again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a health expert as well. I am a paramedic, and I do understand how hazardous materials and chemicals will affect the body in emergency response. And I've taken classes as well to kind of help me in that role as well. Again, air monitoring is something I grew up with Star Trek, watching Star Trek, and Spock always had the tricorder, and Spock knew exactly what was there at all times and everything, and that's really the gold standard. Someday, maybe we'll be there, who knows. That's really kind of the gold standard we'd love to get to, but we're not quite there. And since we're not there, we really rely on a whole battery of different instruments to help us make those decisions. And we'll talk a lot about these monitors, and I brought them all. These are all monitors that are on our equipment now on the field. They're all portable, and they all bring a different aspect to us and to the community for community safety purposes. So our air monitoring program, I'll start at the bottom of this list with the PAC 700 and the chlorine. Our air monitoring program that we developed for the department, we're an all-risk department. And so we've developed an air monitoring program to reflect that. We do have major interstates running through town, 680, 780, with a lot of over-the-road trailers hauling chemicals, hazardous materials. It's a chemical world out there. Pretty much everything we rely on it's all chemicals. So we see a lot of chemicals coming through town. We do have a major rail yard and train line running through town with a lot of chemicals running through town, as well as the industrial park with lots of hazardous materials being used in the industrial park. So our air monitoring program is really kind of geared for all of that, and not just one particular aspect. The PAC 7000 on the bottom of the list is a single gas monitor, and this one is specific for chlorine. Chlorine itself is a very hazardous chemical. It was actually the very first chemical weapon used in World War I. To do it, it's very hazardous, has a lot of health effects with it, and can really hurt people very quickly. It's a gas that's kind of heavier than air, and we do have some chlorine that we know that is in town and passes through town. It's on a single gas meter, so if we suspect there is chlorine, we do have this meter. It registers in parts per million, and so we can get a reading for that. It's on its own little meter just because chlorine itself, it's so reactive and so corrosive that we try to keep it away from some of our other meters because it's so corrosive it wants to eat delicate electronics. So that's kind of the reason why we see it by ourselves. We also have another meter that's very similar to this, the PAC 5500, and it's a carbon monoxide meter. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas. It's something that we've really been focusing in town as well as within the state, trying to address. It's a byproduct of incomplete combustion. And it's something that we're kind of always measuring for. We actually, anytime we go on a medical call in town, we're always measuring background readings of carbon monoxide because you don't know if it's there without having the meter. So the meter itself, it's a parts per million meter, and it's always on, and it's something that we're actually always measuring anytime we go anywhere. We have had some CO problems here in town as well that we've been able to catch. Our next meter, moving up, is an exam 5000. That is what this meter does. This is our 5-gas meter, and this is kind of was our bread and butter meter up until the new air monitoring equipment. This is a meter that's measuring a flammable environment, so an LEL meter. So it's measuring flammable vapors that are combustible, and it measures it to % of what we call the lower explosive range. So if there was, for instance, a methane leak or a natural gas leak, something of that nature, or a propane leak, something of that, we would expect to see that, and it would let us know that we're in a flammable environment, and that would allow us to take some actions on it. So it's an LEL meter. It also measures oxygen. Oxygen levels are probably one of the most important readings on this meter. So it's always reading oxygen levels. We like to see 20.9% normal atmospheric measurements. But if there's something that's depleting the oxygen, this meter would let us know, or if there's something that's releasing oxygen into the environment, this meter would let us know. So it kind of depends upon what we're seeing, what would direct us in a direct, what we would want to do. Both of those are % by volume meters, so it's kind of a big meter. It's meaning big measurements on here. The other 3 gases we have on this meter, one is a hydrogen cyanide, is a gas that's on here that we use. We use the hydrogen cyanide for us, really for a lot of firefighter safety, but not just firefighter safety. In a post-fire environment, in an overhaul environment within a structure, a lot of the synthetics that we have in modern day furniture releases cyanide as well as carbon monoxide. And those 2 gases together kind of function to cause a lot of health problems for the public, and specifically firefighters working in that environment. Hydrogen cyanide itself, I think we've all heard about cyanide, very hazardous to our health. And so having the cyanide meter that reads parts per million, and it's pretty sensitive. So that's on this meter as well. You also see carbon monoxide. I'm just going to jump for a minute. Carbon monoxide on this meter as well, and hydrogen sulfide. The carbon monoxide meter is the same sensor that's in the single one. It's just tied into a larger meter in one display. And hydrogen sulfide is the final one. Hydrogen sulfide itself, it's a byproduct of organic decomposition. For us, we're looking into like confined spaces. If we had to make an entry into a below grade storm drain or cistern, something like that, we're definitely concerned with those organic vapors. What they'll sit, hydrogen sulfide is heavier than air, so it wants to fill in those low spaces. And so we use something like a vacuum pump that we can sample air with special tubing, and it is actually a special tubing, it's coated, so we can get air samples. And so those are all kind of OSHA mandated sampling procedures for a confined space, so that's kind of the reason why we also put carbon monoxide on here, so that we meet those mandates all in one meter. So we have these meters on all our first out engines, so both engine 11, engine 12, and rescue 11 has these meters, as well as the chlorine meter and the CO single gas meter. So all our first out staffed equipment all have these meters. Now these next meters are all new meters to us, and this is the part that I get really excited about, because this is really cutting edge fire department meters. Most of these meters were all hazmat meters that were specific to hazmat teams, and I'm really excited about it because I don't know any other fire departments that are using this level of air monitoring at the engine company level. So I think we're really setting the standard on these meters, and it makes me really excited to be part of that. So the first meter that's, or next on the list is this one, the PPB Ray 3000. PPB is parts per billion. So it's measuring parts per billion of VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. VOCs are, you go into different areas and you get that odor. If you were to open up a container of acetone and you start smelling that acetone, it's very volatile, it's organic, it likes to leave the environment and fill that gas space. So this meter is really designed for that. It's a quantitative meter, which simply means that it gives accurate readings in parts per billion. So very sensitive. It doesn't tell us what a gas is though. So it's strictly a quantitative meter. Tells us how much of something is there, but doesn't tell us what that something is. We rely on other cues, things that we can research to help identify what those other somethings are. It makes it a lot easier if we know what it is. For instance, if there was a vehicle accident with a tanker truck, getting shipping papers and the documentation to help identify what the vehicle's carrying will help us make those determinations. But it's very sensitive at parts per billion. It's really kind of setting the standard. It's very specific, very sensitive as well with it. Its limitation though, it's ionizing a gas. And so ionization simply means that it's kicking off an electron. So it's kicking off an electron off of a gaseous field, and it creates an ion, and it can count that. The limitation on this machine is that the energy source that it's using to kick that electron off is an ultraviolet lamp, a UV lamp, very similar to like a tanning bed, a UV lamp at that. So it's limited at 10.6 electron volts is what we're using this thing for. So 10.6 electron volts. It's really good for hydrocarbons. It just turns out that a lot of hydrocarbons tend to have low ionization potentials. And so this meter is a good hydrocarbon meter. And so that's kind of how it fits for us.
And prior to the Valero district, I was working as a consultant out there doing this type of work, both nationally, all across the country, and internationally. While I have your attention, Eric, as some of you may know, is getting ready to retire at the end of the year. So I want to take the opportunity to congratulate him on his retirement. I'd also like to introduce Rainey Chang, who is our new Director of Meteorology and Measurement. I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that she was here participating in this event so that you could get to know her a little bit, and so that she's not left off the hook. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the types of monitoring that we're doing, the regulations that we are working from and that we have implemented at the Air District regarding air monitoring in refinery communities, and what those monitoring and program requirements happen to be. I'll also give a status on the next steps on the monitoring that's happening here in Benicia and in the other refinery communities across the Bay Area. And then I guess we'll skip the question and answer until the end. But there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions, and we'll try to address anything you want to know. I guess I should click. To begin, I want to make it clear that the monitoring efforts that were put in place regarding fence line and community monitors are not the first monitoring that we've done. Obviously, you all know that. You've been living here with it for a very long time. We've been doing in-facility monitoring for decades. Continuous emission monitoring on all of the, not all, but many of the processes within the refinery facilities. We do source testing, both my team and contractors, that we provide oversight and review of their work. And there are leak detection repair programs which are ongoing within the refineries to identify fugitive sources from components within the refinery, valves, flanges, seals, things like that. There's ongoing inspection that happens and requirements within the regulations for repair whenever a leak is found. There has also been ongoing fence line monitoring prior to what we are implementing now. We've had the ground level monitoring system in place, which measures hydrogen sulfide and SO2 and/or SO2 within the communities but they're strategically placed in locations where we expect any type of refinery emission to travel, so that we can actually measure it at that location, so quantify it there. In addition, EPA several years back put out a refinery sector rule, maximum achievable control technology standards. They revised them, which required the refineries to encircle their perimeter with benzene monitors. There's some pretty involved calculations that go into how you actually place them, but it's based on the meteorological conditions and how close particular release points happen to be to the fence line and where they could actually come across. Areas where you could expect more benzene to cross the fence line tend to be more densely packed with point monitors. We also have our air monitoring network sites throughout the Bay Area, which provide a regional picture of what the air quality is in our area. We used to actually have a monitoring system here in Benicia, which we did close down several years ago. It turned out that it was that other monitors in the area were representative and actually gave us a good idea of what was happening here. Monitors in Valero, monitors in other areas. So, we also have incident response monitoring, which happens typically not for emergency such as the New Star incident. Those are hazardous locations. We are not first responders. But in some other low hazard environments, we might respond with our incident response personnel to take air monitoring samples and have them analyzed to find out what type of exposures might have been taking place. As far as the current facility monitoring goes, the source monitoring, whether it happens to be continuous or whether it happens to be source testing, it's measuring emissions and composition from individual sources. I'm trying to go through and outline some of the limitations that we see with some of the monitoring efforts, which kind of led to why we're pursuing the fence line monitoring and the community monitoring options. So it's individualized sources. So it's single points that we tend to do source testing at or have continuous emission monitors located at. Which can be a bit limiting on the information that you're actually gathering. So we want to be able to expand that. These monitors or the source testing can identify normal or upset conditions, but only for the specific things that you happen to be monitoring for. In other words, if it's a combustion source, we would tend to be looking at carbon monoxide, nitrogen, nitric oxide, NOx, or sulfur dioxide, things like that. So if there's an upset, we'd be able to identify that, but that would really only give us information for the specific pollutants at that specific location. It wouldn't give us a broader picture. As far as the ground level and the current fence line monitoring that we're doing, they're really only designed for chemicals emissions that are produced near ground level, near the refinery, right? So, and it's best for the fugitive emissions. So the things that are going to be in the breathing zone, things that are going to be, but still at the particular points that we happen to be monitoring. So wherever the ground level monitoring happens to be. As far as the RSR benzene monitors, those are points along the perimeter. There are gaps. We may not see things like that. Those are the things that we're trying to capture with the new programs that we're actually trying to put together. They can also be affected by other non-refinery emission sources based on their location. Traffic sources, natural sources. Those are things that you might see on these monitors, particularly traffic sources where you might have SO2. Natural sources of H2S you might see at the ground level monitoring locations. We want to try to implement monitoring procedures that are going to be able to filter those things out so that we can see more specifically what's happening at the refinery and how the things that are happening at the refinery are affecting the community. One of the drawbacks of the current point benzene fence line monitors, not only that they're individual points that are spread out, but also they're 2 weeks integrated samples. So what they are is passive monitors, little tubes that you put out there at these points, and they sit there for 2 weeks, and they passively let air diffuse through them. And then you go back and analyze that after you pull it off 2 weeks later. So it'll give, and then you apply calculations for how much volume it would have picked up over that time, and then you do calculations to determine how that represents an average over a 2 week period. not really useful if you're trying to identify individual events and be able to track those events back to a specific process. Good for long-term community monitoring because you might know what types of exposures are happening over a period of time, but not necessarily giving you the detailed information that we want to have so that we can actually inform the community, let you guys know what's happening. You know, in a more real-time, on a more real-time basis. So a few years ago, how many years was it?
April 2016.
2016, April 2016, we adopted Rule 1215. It's established the first of its kind monitoring requirements and fence lines in these refinery communities around these facilities. I'd like to point out, as somebody who works all across the country in refineries stretching from the East Coast to the West Coast prior to my time here, this is really a forward-thinking program. This is not something that has been done in other places, at least not extensively, and certainly not regulatory mandated by regulation. It's really a huge step forward. And the Air District Board responded based on the community requests to have these monitors installed. And originally it was designed where the refineries themselves were going to operate these monitors. But based on community input, we decided that it was going to be better, and I'm talking specifically about the community monitors associated with 1215, as opposed to, and it's not really part of 1215, but it came from 1215. We were originally proposing in 1215 to have the refineries install community monitors. Based on input from the communities, we decided to pull that out of 1215 because they wanted the air district, the community wanted the air district to actually be the ones to operate these monitors, which we thought was a good idea because we could actually wrap it into our regular network monitoring as well. As far as the fence line component of the monitoring, it's leveraging really advanced open path monitoring technologies. And I won't get into the fine details here, but we can get into those at some point if you want to. But it's going to expand the fence line coverage that we see from the point monitoring systems that are currently there. And we can direct it in such a way that it's along paths where we would potentially see things crossing the fence line that would impact the communities, particularly the residential areas around the refineries. South Coast Air Quality Management District and the state both came out with regulations after we did that are based on the program that we put together. As far as the fence line monitoring requirements go, the required components are benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene, and hydrogen sulfide. These are the things that the facilities have to measure along their fence lines, or at least the paths that are part of their program. Other compounds that we would look at, which depend on whether or not they exist within a particular refinery. We put out guidelines for the monitoring plans and the network design, which the refineries prepared and submitted to us for review. These monitoring plans require a quality assurance project plan component, which we are currently in the process of going through. There's been several iterations back and forth with the refineries. The quality assurance project plan is really, it's the quality assurance guideline that they are going to be operating under. It defines the metrics, it defines the procedures that they need to apply to ensure that they are providing data of reasonable quality and accuracy during the operation of these monitors and data that's being reported to the websites. Which brings me to the public availability of the data. The refineries are all operating websites where this data is to be posted on a near real-time basis. In the case of Rule 1215, these fence line monitors are posting the data every 5 minutes. It's supposed to be updated every 5 minutes. It is updated every 5 minutes. So that's part of our requirement. The community ambient air monitoring systems, which came out of the 1215 process but aren't part of 1215. These are going to be established and operated by the Air District, as I stated earlier. Assembly Bill 1647 also required that there's a community monitoring component in the state regulation, which was put together based on our regulation, in addition to fence line monitoring. Compounds that are going to be monitored, it's a broader mix of compounds than what we're actually doing at the fence line, we'll be doing at the community monitor. Organic compounds of various types, criteria pollutants such as NO2, carbon monoxide, particulate, hydrogen sulfide. We're targeting community locations that are most impacted by refinery emissions so that we can provide additional information. Basically what that means is the siting of the monitor. We want it to be representative of what the community will see coming from the refinery. There are many things that we need to consider when we're actually talking about doing ambient and fence line measurement. I'm sure many of you are already very, very familiar with this, been living in a refinery community for so long. The levels of air pollution in any community, whether it's a refinery or otherwise, are affected by many variables. Natural background. It's not just industrial emissions or automobiles that produce pollution. The natural environment produces pollution. There's already dust in the environment from other natural sources, not to mention volatile organic compounds, and hydrogen sulfide potentially from bogs or from marshes, things like that. It can be affected by emissions from a combination of common sources or even unique sources. Cars, restaurants, the refineries, obviously, other plants, cement plants. I read an interesting study a while back on VOC spikes that are seen in urban environments when people in the morning are getting ready for work and they're using their home products to actually, their perfumes and their hairsprays and things like that. So there are other sources that need to be considered. Transport from other areas into a particular community. You're not isolated here, or any of the communities around the Bay Area. There are other sources of pollution, and it's potentially blowing in from other areas, either in the air district, our air district in the Bay Area, or outside of it. One of the highest contributors to PM in the ambient environment is sea salt. The meteorology plays a great effect on what you're going to see. It varies daily with the seasons. Chemical reactions in the atmosphere, certain types of pollutants that are released into the atmosphere might have short lifespans, they might have longer lifespans, they might react with other things. Ozone is a great example of that. Ozone is not emitted directly from any of the sources. Ozone is a product of chemical reactions in the atmosphere. The topography of the area that affects both the wind conditions, the valleys that we were talking about earlier with the H2S, I was talking about how it settles because it's heavier than air. The topography can have a great effect on what those concentrations are going to be, both on a localized and on a regional scale. I mention all these things just to highlight the fact that air pollutants in ambient air, it's complex chemical mixtures, and they vary widely in time and space. These are things that need to be considered whenever you're trying to put together any type of monitoring program, whether it be fence line or from a monitoring station. The usefulness of any monitoring program or station is only going to be as good as when it's designed and you select the site with the specific data uses in mind and know specifically what you want to measure, why, and you employ sound scientific principles to the siting and to how you're going to measure it. Very important when you're trying to determine the air quality in a region, in a location, along a fence line. I keep forgetting to hit the button. Throw something at me if I forget. So things that, some of the factors that affect both the community ambient monitoring and the fence line system siting. Obviously location obstructions, buildings are a problem. Parking lots are a problem. You don't want to locate them near areas which could in some way impact the measurements and skew those measurements in a direction that aren't going to be representative. Source contributions, if you're putting your monitoring system too close to a particular source, well, it's not going to necessarily give you a reasonable average of what it's going to be over the entire community. It's going to be skewed one way or the other. We want to try to average those things out a little bit while still making sure that when it comes to air toxics, you're actually capturing anything that could be harmful or hazardous. Again, I'd already mentioned these, but the meteorological conditions, prevailing wind speed and direction, the topography, the chemical composition of what you're trying to measure, specific pollutants of concern, and the technologies that you actually want to employ to measure them. We're trying to look for the technologies which are going to be best measure the specific things that we are looking for. Some of the other considerations when you're actually trying to site a monitoring station, which Eric has been through extensively. You need the ability to remain at a monitoring location for a long time, years to decades, because when we put up a site, it's a significant resource investment, both in the equipment and in the personnel that are going to be operating it. So you want to make sure when you make that type of investment, it's going to be in a location where you're going to be able to maintain it for a significant period. It's not something you can just put up and take down within a month or within a year or something like that. We want long-term measurements. Sometimes the ability to get power at these locations is hindered. So you need a location where you can get adequate power, someplace that's secure. I can tell you a story about one of our offices and one of our test vans and source tests that got broken into and the instruments all got stolen. We don't want that to happen at one of our monitoring stations. We want to be adequately secured so that so you don't lose assets in that way and you can maintain operation. And we need to have regular access. We have operators that need to access these systems so we can maintain them. The process that we go through to identify the monitoring station locations. We held community meetings in February, March of 2018 to get input and provide information. We put a priority on stations that were going to be in refinery communities with limited network coverage, which meant Benicia. Benicia was in the top of the list because we had some network coverage in other refinery communities, such as Richmond, Martinez, Rodeo. Yeah. We want to leverage activities associated with Assembly Bill 617 to engage communities in the monitoring, and I'll get into 617 a little bit more later, just to give you a brief overview of it, and talk about some of the specifics related to air monitoring associated with AB 617. We want it to be based on existing emissions data and meteorology, identifying areas of likely impact and representative locations. That's part of the applying the science to locating the monitors where they need to be. We look at a range of scientific inputs to determine the best location to locate a monitoring station. So site selection, we're near completion for nearly all the refinery communities with the exception of Richmond, which gets back to 617. We have some monitoring things that are going to happen in Richmond which are going to feed back into where we're going to locate the monitor. We've selected a site here in Benicia for the monitor. That's at Robert Semple Elementary School. We're still working to finalize exactly where it's going to be at within the school. We had a site, but as it turns out, they wanted to do some development of a parking lot right next to where we want to put it, and that's not really adequate for siting a monitor, so we had to go back to the drawing board a little bit, and we're exploring some other locations within the Robert Semple Middle School property where there would still be adequate for siting a monitor. And one of the reasons we chose Robert Semple Middle School is because based on the scientific analysis that we went through, we came up with a zone that was ideal for siting a monitor that would provide representative air quality data for the Benicia community. So that's why we chose that particular school, and that's why we're still trying to work with that particular school on finding a good location within it. The fence line monitoring timelines and issues, we ran into several. They were targeted to be operational in June of 2019, unless there were obstacles beyond the refinery's control. In most cases, that happened. We had to grant some extensions due to construction complications and permit complications with some of the cities, particularly in Richmond. Some of the refiners were already operating fence line systems, and we had to evaluate the systems that were in place to determine if they were adequate and could suit the needs of Regulation 1215, and make modifications to those systems where necessary. The facilities submitted their monitoring plans, and they received conditional approval of those monitoring plans based on approval of a quality assurance project plan that met the Air District's requirements. And some of those requirements have been a back and forth trying to figure out, because we're evaluating the technologies at the same time that we're trying to implement this program. And sometimes in doing that, and when you're trying to push the boundaries of a monitoring program, you're learning a little bit along the way. We already knew a lot, but as part of the implementation, we're learning more about what data quality metrics and quality assurance metrics we can apply to the systems that are going to be employed to ensure that the data ongoing and reported to the websites is going to be of adequate accuracy. As part of that, we've been continuing to evaluate tunable diode laser open path systems for hydrogen sulfide. We have some goals set for detection of hydrogen sulfide along these fence lines. And we're in the process of working with the manufacturers and with the facilities to get it as close to those goals as we reasonably can. Certainly, we're going to get it to a level that's going to be protective and informative. So, but we want to try to overachieve, and so we are working on that. So there have been several extensions granted for the hydrogen sulfide fence line monitoring while we're trying to prove out the technology and work with the manufacturers to get everything in place so that they can achieve the levels of detection that we are actually interested in. As part of that, we are working with the refineries and the manufacturers to identify what the metrics are going to be that are going to be reported to us in quality assurance reports on a quarterly basis. We know what we want. We've talked to the manufacturers about what's achievable, and we've been back and forth on how we're going to make those things happen. So, quickly about AB 617, and then I'll be done. I went on. I told the chief I would be quick, and I wasn't quick. I'm never quick. I just keep talking and talking. One of the main things I want to say about AB 617, there's a little bit more on this slide, but the big thing is AB 617 is employing, it's allowing us to put air monitoring tools in place which are additionally forward-thinking along with the fence line systems and the community air monitoring systems that we're putting in. It's going to allow us to go into the communities and do ambient monitoring on a real-time basis at the street level to find out what's happening within the communities on a block-by-block, corner-by-corner basis. We have systems that we're putting in place with that, and we've also entered into a contract with a company called Acclima. They are going to drive every street in the Bay Area at least 20 times with mobile air monitoring instrumentation so that we can get a map of all the hot spots within the Bay Area so that we know how to direct our assets and our resources to really attack the problem at the local level. What's happening in your backyard, what's happening down your street, that's what we're going to try to do. The information we're going to get from Acclima is going to be informational. It's going to feed to us and give us information that we can use to direct more tangible monitoring We've actually got a system that we are building out that's going to allow us to drive and measure at the part per trillion level, at the street level, for a range of pollutants, both toxic and non-toxic. We hope that that data will then allow us to attribute, to be able to model and attribute what we're seeing to specific sources or specific facilities, whether it be natural, whether it be industrial, whether it's automotive.
In government affairs at the Valero Benicia Refinery, and during this presentation, I just thought, wow, like, Chief Chadwick, good job, and Lori, good job in terms of putting this together, because I think this is a great opportunity to bring many stakeholders together and have hopefully an educational conversation about air monitoring in Benicia. And what I'm excited to talk about is the current air monitoring systems that we have at the refinery. But before I begin with that, I do want to mention to everybody that on December 10th at 4:30 p.m., we're going to be having our Community Advisory Panel meeting. And that meeting is going to be open to the public. We're going to have representatives from obviously the refinery that attend, members of our Community Advisory Panel. So that would be the mayor who represents the city council. We have Diane Ferrucci from the Benicia Unified School District. We have a representative from the Benicia Chamber of Commerce. We also have a representative from the Benicia Industrial Park Association. We have two community at-large members, Trevor Masinski, and we have one other person, I can't think of her name right now. And we also have Marilyn Bardet representing the Good Neighbor Steering Committee. And the reason why I mentioned this meeting is because at that meeting the Air District has agreed to attend and give hopefully a similar presentation. So for folks that wanted to have maybe further discussion or they appreciated having this type of workshop, in a couple months we're going to be having a similar one. And again, that's going to be held on Tuesday, December 10th at 4:30 p.m. at the Valero East, as we call it, building located at the refinery. If you are interested in attending, we are hoping that people will RSVP to us so we can look at getting proper seating and refreshments. And you're welcome to just contact our office or visit the BeniciaCap.com website. It's BeniciaCap.com, and you can send an email as well. So what I'm excited to talk about today is about the refineries monitoring system that currently exists. And what we've decided to do is use a similar map that was used in previous city council meetings, and we call it kind of like the dotted map right over here. So it's pretty self-explanatory. We have red arrows or red lines that I'm going to be talking about. We have pink dots that represent the current fence line monitoring system. We have yellow dots that represent the 3 ground level monitors that, as the Air District has mentioned, have been in existence for many years. And then we have a series of other, as the mayor had mentioned, we can answer any questions after all the presentations have concluded. The first entity that I want to talk about is really one that is very, very importantly that all the refineries, they have continuous emission monitors. And they're looking for NOx, carbon monoxide, SO2, H2S, TRS, etc. So these are different compounds. And all of this data is coming from our stacks and going to the Air District in terms of the monitoring of that. Now, why is this so important? And why is number 2, another bullet point, so important to emphasize? Because at the end of the day, safety is the most important thing that we need to focus on at the refinery. Our people, our employees, we have about 500 full-time employees, 200 contractors. They are constantly on the ground, and they are the ones that are right next to those sources. So we better make sure that our people are going to be having the accurate monitors there. And not only is this why I wanted to start with our refinery in-facility monitors, but but I really want us to focus that. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the community monitoring, but understand, we have lives, my life included, that, works at the refinery, and we're going to make dang sure that safety is always the #1 priority, because we're not going to ever jeopardize any of our workers, any of our contractors, and we need to make sure that we have accurate monitoring, and that's why we want to highlight and show this does not do any justice to the amount of monitors, but when you look at our process devices that require daily calibration and data historization, that means that the portable monitors, which I think is great for the fire district to have, it gives you the freedom to go to different locations. So whether or not there's a wildfire, if there is a gas leak, maybe at PG&E, if there's some other type of incident, having those portable monitors is very valuable for the fire district, because boom, they can just go straight over to that source and be able to have that freedom to be able to detect certain chemicals and compounds. So I think the portable monitors is a very valuable tool. We too at the refinery have portable monitors. We also have stationary monitors. May not necessarily look, we don't really have them identified through these blue little arrows right here, but throughout our facility, there are portable monitors, and there's also stationary monitors that is gathering data all the time and that we are looking at. I mentioned that we have what's called SEMS, and the Air District referred to that in their first slide. Okay, that's continuous emission monitors that are looking for certain compounds. We also have stack testing for non-SEMS constituents, and that would be particulate matter, because that's becoming an issue that's getting a lot of attention, and also for sulfuric acid mist. So I wanted to mention that, again, when you look at the map, again, it doesn't really do justice, because there's so much monitoring going on within the facilities, because it's all about keeping our people safe. Our employees, our contractors, and anyone that goes into our process block, we have to be able to do that, because that's where the sources are located. Now, I wanted to highlight a specific website for folks that are interested in gathering the data. If you want to look at the monthly flare information from really any of the 5 refineries, click on this website link, and you can go and scroll down, and they have by month Excel graph documentation that gives you detailed information about some of the information coming from our flares. So I encourage you to start utilizing the Air District's website and visiting that particular site, if it will help you understand a little bit more about in-facility or refinery monitors. Next section that I want to talk about would be the orange dots right here. And these would be our ground level monitors. And they got a little bit of attention, obviously, by Jerry earlier. But what's fascinating with these ground level monitors is we have 3 located right now. We have one, looks like on the west side of Benicia, and then we have 2 that are somewhat near the industrial park and on the southwest portion of the refinery. They were installed, and they are, as he had mentioned, measuring hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide in ambient air from all sources. Now, why do we want to talk about ambient air? Because if you look, we have 680 that's going right along the refinery, okay? And we also have some railroad tracks that are going along the refinery. He also mentioned that there was natural occurrences that produce VOCs, okay? Whether it's the wetlands or other types of sources. That information is considered what's part of ambient air, and that specific ground level monitor could in some ways capture that data. And what we were able to do when we implemented our fence line monitoring website was take the 3 different ground level monitors and incorporate it into our fence line website as well. So you can go and you can look and see, okay, what exactly are the current levels or near real-time data for those ground level monitors in regards to H2S and for sulfur dioxide. I included the link. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but if you haven't had a chance, please go ahead and visit it. And most importantly, go to the resource section. The resource section explains, and we have a frequently asked questions, little subsection within it that tries to answer some basic questions that folks that really don't understand this whole data and meteorological world that we have to live in with, Air Refinery 101, and provides different answers to. There's also information about the different chemicals and compounds that exist at most of the refineries, and also it gives some different data points as well. So if you have an opportunity and if you have any questions, please, you can go to the website. You can either email through the website's contact us section, or you can contact anyone at the refinery, and we'll have a member of our environmental department hopefully answer that question. The pink dots, as you see along the map as well, those go right in. Those were required, as Jerry and Eric mentioned, with BAQMD's Regulation 1215. And it is fascinating right now. As Jerry had mentioned, this is a first of its kind technology and monitoring system that is going on. And I think that then when you understand the complexities, as he's mentioned, that the evaluation of the systems, working with the manufacturers, trying to figure out, okay, exactly what are the troubleshooting efforts that we need to deal with, whether it's in regards to specifically H2S open path monitoring. Those are very, very real, not necessarily concerns, but challenges that the Air District and the refineries are trying to work out. If there's other locations in the United States or the world, please let Eric or Jerry know, because right now in some ways we're the guinea pig. We're trying to get this brand new, as they mentioned, first of its kind monitoring tweaked out right now. And because of that, all 5 refineries right now, they've been given an extension until March 17th of 2021 to hopefully get this installed, as he has confirmed. Thank you. Before I go to the next particular slide, I did hear a couple things from Mayor Patterson that I just wanted to incorporate in my presentation, and that has to do with that interesting term called the QAP. Okay, which is the Quality Assurance Performance Plan. Valero, we have submitted our QAP, okay, to the Air District, and once it is approved, we're going to take the approved QAP, we're going to send it over to Chief Chadwick, they're going to put it on the city's public information bank, and it will be available to the public. We have our flare minimization plan that Chief Chadwick has already put on the public information bank. And we also have, as the Air District mentioned, the approved air monitoring plan for our fence line system that is there. So please rest assured, once we get approval of our QAP, that information will then be uploaded to the website and the public will be able to review it. Consequently, once you get the QAP approved, then you can start looking and submitting to the Air District the QA/QC reports, okay? So the QAP has to be approved before the QA/QC reports are able to be essentially digested by the Air District. So again, once we are able to get through this approval process by the district, all of that information will hopefully be uploaded onto the public information bank that the city has as a way of us trying to help provide valuable information for the residents. On that note, I will move quickly over to, again, this is just a much clearer, accurate diagram, but it basically shows, if those of you that want to know what exactly does the fence line monitoring system look like, we provided a couple pictures right here. We also displayed the distance between the retroflectors and the analyzers. We said, you know what? Since we're going to the Benicia City Council, and since we had made the agreement, the amendment to the GNSC agreement, let's make sure we are very clear about path 4. That was the fence line path that we are going to be putting in our buffer zone area that's going to be located in the northwest portion of our buffer zone. Again, we are committed to moving ahead clearly with the extension of our fence line monitoring program to include Path 4. But right now, with this H2S open path challenge right now, we've got to get this troubleshooting figured out. We got to get the troubleshooting figured out, we got to get the QAP approved, and then we'll look forward in getting the permits, working with the city and collaborating with them, and any other right-of-way conditions with PG&E, and make sure that we get that up and going. And we are really looking forward to getting Path 4 up and going. But again, please understand the timeline and the current technology challenges that we are dealing with. I wanted just to highlight one more set of dots, as we say, okay, and this is the one that you see quite a bit, but there are 22 different sorbent tubes that are located around the refinery perimeter, along with the tank farm and the wastewater treatment plant. And as Jerry mentioned, they are passive fence line monitors. There is a website that the United States EPA is now put together. They're uploading data. What's interesting is data is coming from all over the United States. So every refinery now is able to have public information about this type of benzene method source testing uploaded onto the site. And the last point, and a very important one, is right now the Valero Benicia refinery is below the EPA action levels. So on that particular note, I'm hoping that we can get through the other presentation, answer any questions, but more importantly, continue the dialogue. And again, I want to invite everyone to the Community Advisory Panel meeting that we're having on December 10th, 4:30 p.m. at Valero East. If you aren't able to make it and you have any additional questions, I will gladly submit them to our environmental department, since they're our subject matter experts. And again, thank you, Chief and City Manager Tinfo, for inviting us to give this presentation.
Okay, thanks very much.
BCAM stands for the Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program. And the seeds for BCAM were laid about almost 20 years ago, in the year 2000, when the Benicia Good Neighbor Steering Committee formed. And one of the reasons they formed was the public concern about air quality in Benicia. And so there is a handout that goes through the history. I won't read everything about it, but I think the key thing is that in 2008, there was a settlement agreement between Valero and the Good Neighbor Steering Committee that allocated $14 million to fund environmental projects benefiting the community in reducing energy consumption and saving water. And one of the projects that was funded under this 2008 agreement was a year-long air monitoring experiment that sponsored jointly and overseen by the Air District and Valero and the Good Neighbor Steering Committee. And there was a contractor, Argo Scientific Company, that was involved with that. So that was a year-long test that there was $250,000 allocated to purchase equipment, air monitoring equipment, and a trailer. And during that year-long test, we found that it's important to have multiple air monitoring points in the city, just considering the topography and the meteorological conditions, that the more data and more places you could measure, the better. And that was actually seen during a grass fire that took place, I think it was in 2008, where you could see that there were high levels of pollution in some areas, but they weren't necessarily detected by the Air District monitors. The next step was beginning in 2017 and then culminating in 2019, the Good Neighbor Steering Committee pursued a legal process with Valero and the City of Benicia and adopted an amendment to the previous amended 2010 settlement agreement, and it allocated funds for 4 projects. One of those projects is BCAMP, the Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program. and it was awarded $460,000 to establish an air monitoring program, a nonprofit organization to fulfill the long-held aim to establish and operate a permanent, independent, community-based air monitoring program. So the main purpose of BCAMP is to sample and upload air monitoring data onto the web so that it's available to the public. So to do that, BCAMP was formed, well, we're sort of in the process of forming right now. The funds, the $460,000 are held in trust right now until the BCAMP is set up. But we have 5 board members, and they're all here today. And I should say that I'm a retired chemical engineer, but I'm not an expert in air monitoring. But and everyone on the board has certain skills they bring to the board. But what we share is a passion to do this thing right and make sure that we get the air quality data uploaded and available to the public. And I'll just introduce the other board members. Kathy Carriage is our treasurer. Marilyn Bardet is a member, and also Nancy Lund is here, and also Bart Sullivan. We've been working and meeting since the summer, and we're getting along well together and getting things done. And what we're getting done is getting all the paperwork to get us established first as a corporation, get the paperwork submitted to the California Secretary of State, which we're in the process of finishing, and also getting established as a nonprofit, filing the paperwork with the feds so that we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So what have we done so far? The board coordinated with Valero and Argo Scientific, who we plan to hire, or we're going to hire as a contractor to take care of the analytical instrumentation and monitor and make sure that they're working properly. So we've located the trailer that we used in 2008 with the analytical instruments. We've located that at Russell Woodworks, and that's on Bayshore Road, on sort of the south end of Bayshore Road. And the reason we located it there was, number one, availability. We couldn't just pick any place. We had to get an agreement with the owner, private owner, and we've done that with Russell Woodworks. But we have the other three that were mentioned earlier about. We have power there, we have security, and we have access. So it's actually, we're going to locate the instruments in a building that was formerly used as a cell tower equipment cement block building. So it's a good, secure building. So we've purchased insurance for the instruments and the trailer. Argos has now taken the instruments out and sent them back to the manufacturers for recalibration, and we expect them to be back towards the end of November. As I mentioned, we've got articles of incorporation submitted to the California Secretary of State's office to get us set as a corporation. We've drafted bylaws, and we have an EIN number from the IRS, and we're working on the nonprofit form. Then we've also have a URL for our BCAMP website. We've reserved the URL, so we're ready to go once we get data to post there. So what we're planning to do is, first, in terms of the analytical instruments, we plan to get those recalibrated, as I mentioned. And we have an ozone analyzer, a gas chromatograph, a particulate matter analyzer, a black carbon analyzer, and an open path analyzer. So those will be installed. We also have like a meteorological station instrumentation so that we have ambient temperatures and wind conditions. So when the analyzers are returned, They will be placed in this cement block building that I mentioned at Russell Woodworks. And then we'll have to install a sample line because it'll be a point sampler for all those instruments except for the open path analyzer. I should say I don't know the exact configuration of the open or location of the open path analyzer right now. I think Argos has plans, but I don't have that detail with me right now. So then the analyzers will be tested in their new location, and then they'll be connected to a server which will upload the data on a real-time basis, and we hope to get that done by the end of this year. So in terms of future activities, not only oversee the initial setup and monitoring operations conducted by Argos, but we plan to be promoting the public benefits of BCAM's missions to measure the ambient air quality 24/7. And we plan to offer educational background on the health risks associated with acute and chronic exposure to constituents of urban air. So, and our bylaws that we've adopted, we envision collaboration with other similar focused organizations such as AirWatch Bay Area, which provides an interactive website showing air pollution data collected from all monitoring sources available within the Bay Area region. So that's what we're doing, and I think we're off to a good start. So yeah, when we get around, we can answer questions when we get to that point in the meeting. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. My first set of questions are for Fire. Once again, thank you for a terrific presentation. I was talking to Doug and gave me permission to call him Engineer Spock because I thought my last name is hard to pronounce, and he beat me, but that's a good thing. Questions I have are with respect to the air monitoring training. Would you characterize that as ubiquitous, or is that something that is unique that defines, makes Benicia's Fire Department special?
Okay. Boy, that's
It's okay to brag.
We do spend a lot of time on air monitoring. All our personnel are trained at a pro operations level. And so with that, it brings a level of training there. The new equipment now really ups our game, for lack of a better term. Air monitoring itself, I mean, good air monitoring is awesome. But there's so many different variables, and it takes a level of expertise to get there. So it's something that at the firehouse we're doing every month. Every month we are focusing on a new aspect of these monitors and incorporating them into our daily activities. So it's something that, I mean, it's super important, and it's something to try to maintain those levels. It is something that we take. I'm not aware of any other fire departments in the area. I've been doing hazmat since 2002, I think, not to date myself, and I'm not aware of any other fire departments in the area that at the engine company level where we have implemented this are able to duplicate this. So kind of cutting edge there.
So my second question, which I think you answered, but I'm just looking for confirmation. So clearly you do not work 24 hours a day.
No.
So it sounded as though at the department, various stations, the trucks, all the way down, there is cross-training. Most, if not all, members of the fire department have some level of understanding on using the instruments and how to interpret, read the data, and respond accordingly.
Yes, that is correct. There are, I'm one of 3 hazmat specialists within the department. We are spread across other shifts, so we try to have one available when we can. My cell phone does ring off duty occasionally as well, but I'm finding that is becoming less and less as I see the occupancy levels increasing and people becoming more comfortable with the equipment and as the training progresses.
And then my last question for fire is, can you briefly kind of qualify your confidence in the readings of the instruments that you have now? In other words, if you see something, there's a great deal of confidence that there is something that deserves attention, requires some action plan. And then briefly, if you can provide a Reader's Digest, you have this data, and what are some of the signals, the action items that we would pick up from this, that would, and then share, maybe what some of the responses would be from the fire department based on readings, whether it's location-based or event-based.
Okay, a lot of parts of that
Yeah.
one, so let me see what I can do.
So in a nutshell is, the best data is actionable data.
Yes.
That's really the value of these instruments. We have these instruments, Reader's Digest, based on readings, maybe briefly kind of explain some of the policies and procedures.
Let me
Results.
real quick on
Yeah.
that one. So first off, on the how confident we are on the data, we follow the manufacturer's recommendations on calibration, and these instruments require quite a bit of calibration. So you can see with the number of instruments we have and multiple of them on every engine, it's part of our either daily, weekly, or monthly service day. We have a trigger that will say, okay, it's time to do the calibration. We have a procedure. Some of them you put in a machine and you press a button and it calibrates it. Others you have to do like sniffer tests with gas, bump tests with gas that we have. But we are very confident in the quality of the data that we're seeing. As far as the action items that come, really it depends on what we're seeing. Like I mentioned before, different things that we can do are, we'll just record the data. We will, if it hits a certain level, we might issue an advisory that just basically tells people that what's going on. At the next level, we could go to the point of hitting a shelter in place. At a shelter in place, we would start doing beyond social media, alert Solano, this activating the sirens, or you could get to the level of an evacuation.
So in some, there's an if-then kind of process.
Absolutely. And it's not just always black and white. You can see there's so much different types of data out there that it's not going to be black and white where every single one where you hit an 80.2, it triggers this. It's much more complicated than that, even to the point where I've been on the phone with the Solano County Department of Health, speaking to the doctor up there, saying, these are the readings we're finding. What do you recommend? And getting the physician's recommendations on what our action items are. So it's complicated, but yeah, confident that we'll make good decisions.
Very good, thank you.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions on that. And I think you sort of began to answer it. On the, you said within the area, this is the most that any fire district has. And you're working with the Contra Costa. So do they have the similar kind of equipment?
So I know the the Contra Costa hazmat team will carry a lot of those same equipment. For instance, the Chem-Pro pretty much is standard on hazmat teams. You don't really see it, or I don't really see it on engine companies yet. Some of the larger engine departments like LA County now are starting to put Chem-Pros on their truck companies, just to have it available in the field for use. We're the only department in Solano County as of now that I know of that presently has a Chem-Pro on engines ready to go for engine company response.
So to sort of close the triangle is that we have this equipment with a fire district. We work with CUPA, the county's unifying whatever, and also with the hazmat over in Contra Costa. So we're learning from their experience, and they're learning from some of the information we're gathering. So it's a constant back and forth. Is that correct?
I would say not so much with Contra Costa. We have our own county hazmat team, just like Contra Costa has a county hazmat team,
Right.
where Doug was talking about that they have some of the higher, more advanced technology on it, where their fire department engine companies do not. Same with Solano County. All the other fire agencies don't have it on their engine company level or battalion chief level vehicles, but there are high-tech, there is high-tech equipment on the Solano County hazmat team, similar to Contra Costa. The difference is there's a significant time delay. When we get out there and we detect that there might be a problem and we want to, call them in, and it requires, We've got 3 here in the city, 1 might be on duty. Well, Vallejo might have 2, there might be 2 in Vacaville, 2 members in Fairfield. They have to drive to where the hazardous materials vehicle is, load it up, make sure that, you know, they got everything ready, then drive to Benicia. There's a significant delay, whereas now we can get it right there on scene with the initial dispatch.
So they're probably excited about that too. And then the data, as another follow-up, the data is more than just actionable, it's instructive. And so how do you do that? How do you process that data, take a look at it? What are the trends, what are the associations, what are the characteristics that are better informed? And working with the Air District, actually, I'm sure they would benefit from some of that data.
Right off the bat, early on when we got the equipment, it became clear that it would be overwhelming for us to report every time that there was non-actionable readings. And we get, I was gonna say tremendous, we get a lot of calls in the community for odor complaints. And so we go out, we send an engine company out on an odor complaint. It can be anything from a skunk, somebody burning trash in their backyard, you know, all the way up to, you know, potentially something from the refinery or something across the bay. So we get these very regularly, and we'll go out with our monitors and we'll detect nothing. We don't share that data with the district. It's too much. We don't even record it. If the engine company goes out and they're getting 0 readings on everything, they clear the scene and go back. So our action is more response incident based. We don't trend long-term like a community monitor or fence line monitor. We don't have continuous monitoring. Obviously, you know, when it's packed up in the box and the engine, it's not monitoring, it's not on. So I mean, it's slightly different, from that standpoint. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
It does. It's a heavy lift to ask you to do that, but it would be useful. So it's something to think about, you know, opportunities for an intern, that sort of thing. Just trying. Any other questions?
Yes, or pass, or keep it as you wish.
It's,
No, I have 2 questions for,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
guess, from the air
Yeah.
board. So likewise, thank you very much for your presentations and Godspeed on your retirement. I'm jealous. 2 questions. The mayor started to talk about that. Tell us a little bit about the verification data, the verification process of the data that is collected and that is part of your reporting. We have a scenario of, you know, this is going to happen where we're going to have multiple parties collecting information. We talked about science and sources, so if you could speak a little bit about the verification of the data, like what will be the source of truth in terms of the elements in the air that appears in the reports, and kind of a Reader's Digest on that process.
Are you speaking to the quality assurance reports that are going to be coming in on the fence line systems?
It could be, and that's probably I think that's probably where we should go with this, because ultimately, you know, we want a source of truth that everyone can rely on, whether it's the community or members of public safety or those in the industrial park.
Well, I can tell you, one of the back and forth that we've had, and the reason it's
You
taken...
need to speak up, please.
The reason it's taken quite a while back and forth on the quality assurance project plans, which is partially my fault. I tend to say anal and detail-oriented would put it lightly. We're trying to identify, it's not a one-size-fits-all for the technologies that are actually being employed for the fence line systems. There are different types of open path monitors that we're trying to employ. One that I had mentioned was the tunable diode laser for the hydrogen sulfide. Another is open path Fourier transform infrared system. Another is a UV system. Some of them are actually point sources that take in data from individual points along the fence lines, depending on which refinery we're talking about. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So what we've been doing is going through and trying to identify what could provide ongoing validation of data continuously for each of these types of systems, whether it be the signal intensity, which is going to be continuously measured, whether it's bump testing, where you actually take a gas out there and run it through the stream or whether it be some other form. In some cases, it might be measuring a parameter like methane in the atmosphere, which tends to be fairly consistent. And it can be kind of a vetting tool where if you're getting the response that you expect on methane, then you can be assured that it would be responding for other components that you happen to be looking for. So all of these are things that we're going to incorporate into the quality assurance project plans that the refineries are going to be checking on an ongoing basis and putting into their reports. And then we will review those quality assurance reports to make sure that the specifications that we're going to outline in the quality assurance project plans have been met to validate that data. I don't know if that answers your
It
question.
does, that's
Okay.
very helpful. And then, last question?
Okay,
Or, yes? Very good, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, I appreciate it. So last question is, again, it's very reassuring to see California continue to take the lead on matters of the environment. In this case, we're talking about air quality and monitoring specifically. You referenced AB 617 quite a bit. What is your guidance to Benicia? So we're going to have these monitors in place, whether it's a year or some months after that. We're going to have our process up and going. We're going to have partners that are collaborating. But what, as a community and council and staff, what should we continue to focus on so we don't have to wait for another piece of legislation to address kind of some of the outstanding things that maybe AB 617 doesn't cover? Yeah, thank
there
you.
we go.
So,
Future thinking, so to speak. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
the whole point of AB 617 is actually to try and quantify disproportionate impacts in any community. So it covers a very wide spectrum of compounds. We'll be looking at things from PM to organic compounds, and as Jerry mentioned, looking at organic compounds on the parts per trillion level to try and determine exactly what contributes to any disproportionate impacts, and then try and identify ways to reduce those impacts. So I think the initial things we're going to be doing is collecting data, finding out where those areas where disproportionate impacts may be occurring, and then focusing additional resources in those areas to try and determine what's causing those impacts. So, for action that Benicia can take, I think at this point it's just letting that data come in, trying to digest that, using that in a way in which you can leverage other activities like BCamp to locate things appropriately and things like that. Hopefully also, in the future, that information can be used by this council to, make land use decisions and things of that nature. We're hoping that we can provide that information to cities and counties so that they can make, choices based on information about air quality also.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I'm just gonna do a time check. How many in the public wanted to have a chance to ask a question or two? Could you raise your hands? Okay, so I don't wanna take your time, so that's why I was doing that check. We plan on going to 9, so, what we might wanna do is take another break after the council asks their questions. We'll take a break.
When we had people who installed purple air monitors, which also measured particulate matter, they didn't get readings that they expected when the refinery was flaring, primarily because they does not measure those kinds of gases and emissions. And what was explained to me is that it measures smoke, like from a wildfire or from the incident at New Star. Is that correct?
Okay. It measures a lot more than just smoke. So it's looking at, I pulled up the EPA document, and some of the more common components that it's measuring, nitrates, sulfates, ammonia, that could be present in there. Those gases are going to go up into the environment and react, and they'll be there. They can be aerosolized, as well as organics, crustals, elemental carbons,
Well,
things like
maybe
that. So it's kind of,
Okay, another way to ask the question, are there any gases or emissions that come out of the refinery that these monitors cannot detect? That you're aware of?
That might be, that I'm aware of.
So
No.
that the air district is aware of?
I
Gary,
don't,
you
well,
want to jump in here?
yeah, the instrumentation that the fire department has are somewhat general instrumentation, right? So where they may be able to identify specific compounds, they may not be able to identify all specific compounds. So they might be able to tell you, there's parts per million VOC in the air, but they wouldn't be able to tell you the compositional makeup of that VOC. So it isn't an easy question to answer.
All right, well, let me try a different one. Valero, a couple weeks ago, maybe more, notified the city that they were going to be doing some flaring over the weekend. And they let us know on Thursday. The chief let the council know on Friday, I think it was going to be happening. But the city didn't choose to alert the community that this was going to happen. And I just want to raise the issue with my colleagues that is this the kind of protocol that we think is right? I heard from a lot of people after the fact, after the flaring happened, well, geez, it would have been nice to know that this was happening. My kid has asthma. I'd like to have been able to keep them inside for the weekend or do something. And so I'm just asking the staff and the rest of the council whether or not you think when we get this kind of notification from Valero, which is called for and which is certainly appreciated, at what point should we be passing that information on to the public?
So to me, that sounds like a question more for your colleagues than myself, because we'll do what we're directed to do. I can tell you my thought process, and it has to do somewhat with, not wanting to cry wolf every time that we get a notice that there's flaring if there's going to be no impacts to health. And so I've spoken with county medical directors. The recommendation was to do monitoring during these processes, and if we're getting zero readings on our monitors, that it would be inappropriate to, I'll just say, potentially scare the public, and maybe the kid that has asthma that's going to have no effect would be able to go play soccer, and now he has to stay home for no reason. So I think that was part of the thought process behind it. If we want to come up with a plan where every time we get notified that there's flaring, even if there's no detections, that we will do some sort of notification, we can follow that direction, but we also need to know how we want to how it is to be broadcast. I mean, we can't knock on everybody's door and tell them. We're not using the newspaper. So yeah, so is it the website? Is it that then you go look on the website and see if there's something going on? That would be a relatively easy one. In this day of social media, we do a lot on social media, so that would be another option. But we get feedback that that's not appropriate also, because somebody might not have Facebook or whatever. So it's challenging that part of the question.
I just personally think I'm on the side of disclosing as much as we can, and let people make their own decisions based on the information that we're provided to them.
So here's a problem that I see with that approach, and that was recently when PG&E was announcing they were shutting power off, our community was not affected, but our pump at Cordelia Pump Station, 14 miles up the road, was going to be affected. And so we often use water from Lake Herman, and the city staff decided that they would let the public know that we were going to go full bore with Lake Herman because we wouldn't be able to pump the state water down to the city. And so shortly after that announcement was made, we started getting phone calls at the city about the lousy taste of the water. We hadn't even shut the pumps off because the power hadn't gone off, and we weren't even pumping from Lake Herman because there's a lot of chemistry that goes on, and when you do the switcheroo, you have to make the adjustments and everything. But within 30 minutes, we had complaints about the taste of the water. So that is why you kind of want to have an understanding of the effect that news has on people and the level that you want them to be aware of so they can protect themselves without being unnecessarily alarming. And maybe we could get some direction. In fact, as I would suggest that be a direction that we provide at the end of the meeting today to staff to actually write up the protocol for that. So we'd be really, really clear and do a little bit of research. We can do a little bit of research and find out what other communities do. But I can see, I thought it was a good thing that the city manager did, letting people know. And now I thought, maybe that wasn't such a good thing. So, go ahead.
Okay, for the district. So fence line monitors capture emissions at the fence line, ground level at the ground. But when you have an event like we had a couple of years ago, that stuff's hundreds of feet in the air. So my question is really, how effective are fence line monitors in that kind of a situation when the atmosphere or the, all the emissions are happening well above ground level, well above the fence line?
I got that.
Okay.
They're not, and they're not designed to be. That's the answer to that question. The emissions that are happening from the point sources at elevation are typically hot plumes, which means they're buoyant. It's like a bobber that you submerge. If you're a fisherman in a lake and you let it go and it shoots up to the top, a hot plume of gas behaves the same way. It's going to want to go up. It's very buoyant. It's less dense than the air around it. So it typically goes up, gets captured by the wind, and gets blown downwind. So it's not typically something that you're going to see at ground level in the breathing zone within the community, because most of the pollutants associated with that are things they're going to transport, so they'd be seen downwind further away from the facility.
And if the wind was coming from the other direction, it would blow it across our residential.
You always have to pay attention to the environmental conditions, to the meteorological conditions and the wind direction. So it's something that you would need to pay attention to.
Weather.
And real quick, hence why I really pushed for portable air monitors so we could go to where the pollution was going to be versus relying on fixed site.
So let me ask about the community air monitor and the locational decision. Robert Semple is the school that's closest to the refinery. You've got monitors all around the refinery. The concern that we've heard from people who live up in the residential neighborhood is, well, why don't we have a monitor up here? Because that's where we live. So my question is, did you look at other school sites up in Southampton? We have 2 of them up there. That are much more centrally located where the bulk of the population is. And we also have a big community park that the city owns that's connected to one of these schools. Why that particular location, and did you in fact look at these other locations and have some reason to select Robert Semple?
So, the short answer is yes. We looked at all the meteorological information that we've collected over the last 10, 15 years in the area. And we also, took into account the fact that most of the compounds that have the greatest impact on folks tend to be very localized around the refinery. So most of the organic compounds tend to be generated at ground level. And so we wanted to concentrate on those compounds because we don't have measurement devices at the refinery itself for those kinds of compounds. We do have ways to measure particulate matter at sources in the refinery, so we're able to quantify that to some extent. In addition to that, it's been our experience that during normal operation, the main concentration comes more area-wide than specific to a particular point source. So we compiled all of this information to determine the best location to be representative of what the community might breathe, for lack of a better term, worst case, as far as health impacts go. We did look at the Southampton area. The wind blows from the refinery in that direction very rarely. That isn't to say that area is never impacted. That's something we can't say. But what we wanted to do is make sure that when we located this station, we were locating it in an area in which we were relatively confident that we would see air quality that was representative of impacts near the refinery the majority of the time. And that was our goal, and that's why we chose the Semple School.
Okay, anything else?
For Valero, first of all, thanks for providing monitors to the fire department. So before I'll say it again. The open path forward, is that the thing that's going to be postponed until September 21, or am I conflating that with something else?
No, it's just the H2S, the tunable diode laser, and that's most of the refineries we've talked to have said that they expect that they can beat that. The manufacturers think they can get it installed and operational prior to that, but that's kind of a worst case where we're going to look at other options if it's going to get pushed out.
It's going to be part of the Valero fence line monitoring system.
It'll be continuation. That's why we have path 1, path 2, path 3, and then for the northern buffer zone area, we consider that to be path 4. Originally, it was not included as part of our fence line air monitoring program that was approved by the district because, as they mentioned, the wind direction is very, very minimal when you look at a 365-day calendar year. Okay, but because of the direction that was given as part of the agreement, we said, okay, we will include a path 4. We're committed to doing it, but want to make sure we get these troubleshooting issues addressed first and also get our QAP approved, and then we can go along with the installation.
Okay, just to get back to the definition of particulate matter 2.5, who would like to actually provide a really good definition of that? It's more than smoke.
I guess that's me. PM 2.5, particulate matter less than 2.5 microns. Particulate matter is defined based on the measurement technology that's employed, or the measurement methodology that's employed. In the case of PM 2.5, it's anything that exists as a solid filtrable particulate of less than 2.5 microns in diameter, or a condensable particulate, which is something that forms as the plume is actually being emitted into the atmosphere. It will nucleate and will combine with other things to form particulates. So it's actually both of those. It's filtrable particulate combined with condensable particulate that are both less than 2.5 micron in diameter.
Thank you very much. We're going to have a test.
I had some questions.
Yes, I'm going to call on you, and you get to respond to that. And so before we take our break, we'll have questions from Councilmember Campbell.
Hey, first one's for the B camp. So when you were describing what you're doing, have you taken all of the instruments basically out of that trailer so it's no longer mobile?
Yeah, we've taken the instrumentation out of the trailer. We're going to locate the trailer within the fence of the cement block building, but all the instruments will be located in the block cement building.
So it's no longer, you couldn't move the instruments around to different sites in Benicia?
Well, I don't think that could be done in sort of like a short-term basis. I mean, it might be able to be done over a matter of like weeks. I don't know, you may have, or months.
Months.
Yeah. I mean,
Years.
because, yeah, I don't, well, maybe the air district guys can comment because you have more intimate knowledge of the instruments.
So, okay, if I could just fill in one more point, because for me, I unfortunately don't like your site, and the reason I sort of gave a letter to Mel the day about it, basically what the problem for me is you're putting it right next to the refinery, and given the way the wind's below, if the logic is you're going to get railroad and highway emissions Well, the way the winds blow is they blow toward the east, so, all of that is going to go into the Grizzly Bay. I think, the meteorologist over there can fill me in, I think the number was about 92% of the time it blows that way. So that being the case, then the other 8% of the time, when it's either still or blowing toward the refinery, what you're doing is you will get information from the railroad and the road, but then so will the refinery, because the wind is going to also blow across the absorption spectroscopy fence lines there. So for me, I'm a little bit concerned about that. Your guys' choice, your instrument as far as it goes, but I was hoping that it could still be moved so that, for example, we could look at some of the sensory receptors, like Henderson School, for example. We've got a community park right behind it. We can put another cement slab there, put the electrical in there. It's not going to be very expensive. That'll cover that one. And then the south side of town, out by, say, like 9th Street Park, same thing. Put cement slab, put an electrical connection there, and you can move it around. But if you're putting it all into a building, then it seems like that takes away that possibility.
Well, thanks for your input. I mean, it's something we can discuss as a board and take your input. I don't, that we'd already, it was part of the question of availability of where we could safely have power and security and a willing host for the site. So I think that was part of the consideration.
Okay, but I can understand that. It's just that, I was thinking, the air district, it sounds like what they're talking about is one more, community sensitive, simple school. So again, for me, the problem I have with that is, that's an awful lot of Benicia which is left there, and so I'm not sure, but 2 sensors planted in one general area is necessarily going to cover all of Benicia with the hills, the valleys, and the winds coming in, and the fact that we've been concentrating mostly on Valero as opposed to what happened last week, which is something I mentioned before, which is we've got 4 refineries to the south, and east of us, the winds blow generally in a direction which puts us right in the bullseye for anything that comes out of us. And so, it's fun to concentrate on Valero, but we have other potential problems. And if anyone remembers when Chevron had that big problem where I think there was 3,000 people went to the hospital. A little earlier we were talking about it. Benzene coming out of Valero is about 1 part per billion. The amount that was coming out of Chevron was in the parts per million, which means it's roughly 3,000 times more than what comes out of Valero daily. So, the risk for us is
So maybe we could ask Eric to respond.
Well, I actually have a question for them in a second, too. Maybe you can answer that one. The other one I have is Richmond, I guess SB 617, had a deal going with the, did I say SB 80?
Yeah.
AB 617. I guess you guys have some program which you started where you're putting in 50 sensors, throughout the community in Richmond. And I'd like to know more about that and the potential for Benicia, because we are just like Richmond, we are a refinery town.
You're right. The community of Richmond was given a state grant to do that work. That wasn't done by the Air District. Those community grants are available through the state on an annual basis, at least for this time period. So it's definitely something that Benicia could apply for and achieve. Yeah, that they can apply for without that.
Okay, along those lines, yeah, that's the Cal Air Resource Order District. And I guess it was like a $500,000 grant they got last year. But as I understand it, you may fill me in on that, there's a restriction. The city of Benicia cannot apply for that. It has to be a community.
Start printing now.
group.
Do not send
that
prints
is
after 8:45.
Incorporated.
You do not have a
nonprofit.
card and want to check out items today, or you need to send a
I
fax.
believe that's
You
accurate,
just come
but
to
it's
customer
not a
service
program
desk.
that we at the district
No new
run.
cards will be issued
So I'm
or
not,
faxed, sent
I don't want to
after
speak out of
8:45.
turn
The
and give
library
you
will be
improper
closing in 30
information.
minutes.
We can certainly find that out and let the council know.
It's very important to note that it's also based on disadvantaged communities,
Right.
and that the proportion scoring, Benicia would have a very, very hard time. Even I did ask when the bill was passed, and the city, if I remember correctly, is the city would work with a community organization. It didn't need to be a 501c3. But looking at the scoring, it's difficult. It's also why Valero got some money to do their major installation with the purple air monitors and some other things. So it's a good thing that these disadvantaged communities are getting that assistance, but it's frustrating to us because we're kind of in that middle class squeeze. And so I think it's a really good question. But I wanted you to follow up on.
If I could just respond to that for just a second. I talked to them several times, emailed them several times. They are well aware of Benicia. They are waiting for Benicia to have a nonprofit apply, and they are more than enthused about the idea of giving us money. But we gotta go through the hoops.
So could Eric, can you talk about the location of the B Camp air monitors? Is that a problem? Do you see that as something that's not as optimal?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, it's difficult for me to say precisely without taking another look at the exact location. I mean, I'm familiar with the general location that it's at, but I'd like to, before I made a general comment, I think I would need to take another look at the exact location, get an idea of the meteorology right there, if at all possible, but I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm being mindful of the time. I'd like to take a break so the public can have half an hour asking questions, and you can ask further questions during that time. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's take a break.
Because I think it's really important. We had the experience this year where the Petco machinery was malfunctioning, and it was a 2-week period where there was a tremendous amount of black smoke that flooded a lot of neighborhoods. And so my question to you is, there was no continuous monitoring, I don't think, during that time. And I feel like we needed that, and we needed some way for the people that lived in these neighborhoods to know what was in their air and whether they should go out in it or whatever. So is the fire department going to be doing that? Is B Camp going to be doing that? So my question, who's going to be doing something like that? Because that's a huge need.
I mean, I could start with that one. So, although there wasn't fixed continuous monitoring, there was near continuous monitoring from the fire department. We were out in the middle of the night on multiple occasions for long periods of time.